Okay, so I'm back. I think we're pretty much ready to go. Um, Maybe we can kick things off by just talking. Just give your who are you and what is it that you do?
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Roger Atkins, and I hang out on LinkedIn. Guess I'm a storyteller. I've done that for on and off for 15 years on LinkedIn. Was on the platform very early. And what I talk about is the transition to electric vehicles and all the associated things that go with that. Um, I was recently called, I don't call myself this, by the way, an expert generalist. But I will take that because whilst I'm not an engineer, a chemist, a designer, or anything as a profession as such, what I've managed to do over my life, certainly my working life, is hang out with really clever people. And what I now do a lot on LinkedIn is spend time with those people. I'm in the very fortunate position of being invited to meet these people, either obviously this year, Sam, online as opposed to face to face. But over time, meet people with great ideas, interesting people, and try and put them together with other people. I like matchmaking, but predominantly I'm trying to tell the story in a calm, rational, non-tribal fashion as to where are we going with it all. That would be it in a kind of nutshell, Sam.
So how is it that you got to this point? Because you've got a I don't like how did you start out and what was it that your background is in?
Originally, I was a musician. I am a creative person, and I wanted to. I guess when I was young, like a lot of people, I was in a band. I wanted to do all that stuff. You go back to the 70s and 80s. I think that the journey for a lot of people in that regard, was about making a living out of doing the thing you loved. It wasn't necessarily about, oh, I want to be famous. It was that, as a job, I wanted to, sing, or I wanted to write poems, or I wanted to do those things, be creative. Obviously, things have changed over time. It seems that people want to be famous first, and then it's a job or whatever. I think that's the wrong way around. Myself, I think you should do what you love, and if you happen to be famous doing it, well done. But if you don't, that doesn't matter, because the real pursuit should be one of fulfillment and happiness. And so that's what I started off doing. I didn't get famous, as I'm sure you've realized.
Well, you're pretty famous on LinkedIn. I think you've got one of the biggest followings I know.
Well, yeah, and look, there's no denying that's flattering, but what comes with that, I'll be honest with you, is quite a responsibility, because you realize that people do listen to what you say. So you have to, you know, you have to think, well, I better make sure I'm saying the right things. Not the things that people necessarily want me to say, but the right things by way of checking out my facts, of trying to be as accurate as possible, to not just be cliched. Um, so yes, I suppose I am well known on LinkedIn. And funnily enough, Sam, what I try to do is I kind of populate some of my posts and comments with song titles now and again, just for a bit of fun, because I've written articles called "Won't Get Fooled Again" and things like that, where yeah, I just sort of think, look, have a bit of fun along the way. That there's If you're old enough to know the origin of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the guy that set it up, a chap called Lord Reith, had a philosophy which was the BBC should inform, educate, and entertain. And look, I'm nothing like the BBC. I'm not a big institution. I'm just a bloke in a shed on LinkedIn. But I try to do those three things: inform, educate, and entertain.
Right. So my earliest knowledge of your career in the automotive world would be at Modec. What was which was one of the early electric transportation startups in the when was it the mid 2000s was it established?
Well, it started, I think, as a concept, and originally actually was going to be an electric taxi, but then became an electric van, a 5.5 ton GVW electric van, around 2000, late 2005, 2006. And I joined the company in the spring of 2007. I think I joined a week after the official opening. Um, and yes, that was my initiation into really understanding the architecture of electric vehicle. What was the bill of materials? What exactly was a battery if you took the lid off? What did it look like? What was, in that case, we had originally a chemistry called sodium nickel chloride, a Zebra battery. And then we moved over to an LFP battery, lithium iron phosphate. And understanding that was my first proper initiation. But a couple of years before that, we'd had two hybrid taxis at London Taxis where I worked. And so that was, I suppose, my first proper sense of, well, what's an electric vehicle? What's a hybrid vehicle? What's a battery? But Modec, as you rightly say, was the real beginning for me.
What is it that you studied? Was it engineering or sales or what?
Okay, so here's the truth. I wasn't that academic, and at school, I liked to basically muck around a bit too much. I had this thought that I was going to be a musician. I didn't see that you needed to go to university or have A levels to be in a band. You just needed to be a bit of a show off, and super confident. So I didn't really study anything. I left school. I had to retake all my O levels and stay on into the sixth form, not like my other contemporaries to get A levels and go to university, but simply to get a few O levels. I got 4 O levels: English, mathematics, statistics, and geography. And that was it. And then I left school and then had a string of different jobs, from being a telephone operator to being a postman to being all sorts of things, because yeah, music was the thing that was what I wanted to do. I then went to live in London and was a kind of professional musician for a couple of years. That sounds glamorous, but living in squats and having no money and all the rest of it was the reality to that life, Sam. But for a few years, yeah, I loved it, and that's what I did. But and then things didn't quite work out. I had, like a lot of young people will have, a few moments of crisis, one or two in particular that were quite, difficult. But yeah, not an academic background. Tried a few things when I was young, a few things maybe I shouldn't have tried. But managed to survive, and have come out the other end. And so I'm now in the blessed position for doing something that I really believe in and I'm passionate about, and I can weave in a little bit of my creativity to it. And yeah, if a few people read stuff I write or make comments, or then great. That's very kind of them.
I think it seems that one of your biggest assets is probably your ability to communicate and connect with people. I mean, that's where your strength seems to lie.
Well, it's like this, Sam. I basically find it difficult to understand some of these things. So what I try to do and how I communicate is I explain it as it's been explained to me, or as I've interpreted it. So in other words, it's not, I hope it's not dumbing anything down, but it's basically thinking, okay, if someone explained to me how a battery works, would I understand it if they said it like this? So for example, I said before, a battery is like a sandwich. It's got 2 bits of bread and the thing in the middle. Anode, a cathode, and a separator. Think, yeah, well, I know what a sandwich looks like. I now understand what a battery cell looks like, because it's like a sandwich.
Right.
If you start getting into a lot more of the metallurgy to it, the process of production of those cells, anode and cathode, in clean and dry rooms, it all gets very technical. And for some people, they will just switch off. So I try to write as it's been explained to me, or as I've interpreted it.
And if we go right up to present day, what is your job today? I know you've got electric vehicles outlook, and you're very much a champion of EVs and renewable energy and a sustainable future. And you are on various podcasts and chat shows and what have you. What is your job today? What exactly are you doing?
Okay, people might be thinking, well, hang on, how does this guy do all this stuff? How does he earn any money? Well, I do get paid to host some events, not all of them, but a number to make a living. That then enables me to have the freedom to spend time reading, which is a luxury when you have to earn a living. Spend a good amount of time reading and researching and looking at things when we could travel, obviously traveling, and not all, but a fair bit of that is often at my own expense. So, I have a job in the sense of getting paid for things. I also work on the advisory board of a number of companies. So the foremost of those is Momentum Dynamics, who develop high power wireless charging, an American company that are now working with BYD, with Jaguar, and many other companies, which are those relationships are under NDA, so I couldn't talk about those. But I actively work for that business and help socialize their story in particular, because I'm very passionate and believe in what they do. And also Zero Avia, which is an electric aviation company, not using batteries, but using fuel cells and hydrogen. And I'd like to talk about that at some point, by the way. So that's my kind of work. That's my kind of job. And yeah, I'm very lucky. I get to work with, meet, and represent some pretty cool companies and impressive people.
What are you normally doing for those companies? I mean, you said that you work in as on the advisory board. I know that you've been a brand ambassador a couple of times, maybe still so. Are you generally putting people together? Are you marketing their brand? As you said, you socializing their message and their work. I mean, would that, if to simplify that, would you say that it's a form of marketing that you're doing for these companies?
Yes, I would, but not maybe classic marketing. In that, I weave into my story what they do when and where it's appropriate. So if maybe for a couple of weeks or a couple of months it's not appropriate, I wouldn't even reference the name. So it's not overt classic marketing in that sense. But what it is enabling, if you like, the liberating technologies, the things that will help the journey that I think we're on come together. That's where I will inevitably talk about them. I can't talk about everybody. I definitely strive hard to be independent. I think that's really important, because you've got to have balance. If you're getting paid money, either a little or a lot of money by somebody, inevitably you're going to talk about them a lot, and that's okay. That's called a job. That's what most people have. But I think if you're a commentator and observer, you've got to try and be agnostic to technologies, to solutions, to all sorts of things, so that you can change your mind occasionally. And occasionally, Sam, say, do you know what? I used to say I was wrong saying that. I've learned this, or someone explained this to me, and I've changed my mind. Because I don't like the tribalism of a lot of things. I don't like the tribalism of batteries being, the panacea, and hydrogen being something stupid. I mean, that's tribal and quite silly, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a kind of run through it all.
Okay, Roger. So I think like we've kind of given everybody some context. I guess the big question for me is, why do we have somebody like yourself on a quote unquote design podcast? So the thing for me is, personally, I feel completely uneducated on the subject. I've worked for a number of different companies now within design, and it seems very evident to me that a lot of people in our sector think they know it all and think they understand future mobilities and autonomous driving and all these buzzwords that are floating around now. And I kind of wanted to get an quote unquote expert like yourself to kind of debunk some myths, and to maybe just have a bit of a discussion around the direction that things seem to be going, and what we could do in the future, rather than just demonize various things and be, as to quote you, tribalize others. So maybe we had a brief chat yesterday, and you were talking. You said like the important thing is to maybe start off with a question, and that could be, what sort of a world do we want to live in?
Yeah, I think, it's always important, whether it's your personal life, the job you do, or a country, or the whole world, to decide what is it you want. What are you aiming for? You've been in car design. You work for some amazing companies. You work for Bugatti. You work for Jaguar. You work for Volkswagen. You work for lots of very interesting people, and the fundamental principle of design: form follows function. So how do we want the world to function with 8 billion people in it, 9 or 10 billion people in it? A scenario that we have never seen in human history. This is a first time, I'll call it a one-off. That's the wrong phrase, but we haven't been there before. And therefore, trying to work out how does everyone get fed? How do we make sure we've got enough water? How do we ensure that we've got enough energy? What is it we want everybody to do? Do we want everyone to be a consumer? Do we want everyone to have loads of stuff? What is happiness? Is GDP the right measure for the success or development of a country? These are huge and big questions, and I think you start with those questions first, and inevitably that goes into many challenging areas like geopolitics. Who controls the world? Who's the most powerful? Who dominates the world? Who owns the resources? Why do they own the resources? It's a complex thing, and it's a moving feast, and it always has been since the dawn of civilization. But like I say again, we have never had this many people on planet Earth, and we have to have a plan to deal with that. And I think there are two key words in my mind. One is efficiency. How do we, whatever we've got, resources and otherwise, how do we make those things operate efficiently? And the other one is resilience. How can we have a resilient society against many of the challenges, with the fundamental one being climatic change? And let me be very specific about that. Man-made, accelerated climatic change. Climate change is an ongoing natural process. It's to do with the planetary movement. It's to do with the position of the Earth to the sun. It's to do with the fact that the fundamental cosmic truth is nothing lasts forever. The sun won't, the moon and the stars, neither will we. But that being said, we're in a time frame where that might be another few thousand, million, or maybe billion years, whatever. It's certainly not a few months, and it's certainly not a couple of generations. But if we're not careful, in the way in which we've released so much CO2 into the atmosphere within a couple of hundred years, and continue to do so, we will only be here as a species for probably, I don't know, it depends who you talk to and how you frame it, but let's say no more than another couple of hundred years. And that would just be so sad.
Wow, that's extreme. That sounds intense.
But that is the way it is, Sam. I mean, there's no point dressing it up,
Okay. Wow. So let's talk. We obviously know that it seems that EVs are the the kind of go-to system to adopt now. You've also said publicly that mass adoption of EVs would be a huge mistake. Could we talk about what the implications would be if we only had electronic vehicles?
Yeah, sure. Just to caveat that, mass adoption of electric passenger cars, not mass adoption of buses, taxis, vans. I'd like to see mass adoption of those vehicles for this reason. They are high utilization assets. They are vehicles typically that operate for much of the day and sometimes through the night. And therefore, the efficiency of those vehicles in what I would suggest is the fundamental principle, which is utilization. They maximize their utilization typically. That makes sense. So let's go to passenger cars. The ownership of a car by a lot of people is the most inefficient aspect of things. Whether it's electric or combustion, it's the same issue. If that car is parked on your drive overnight, if that car is parked in the office car park or the shopping center or wherever, as indeed they are for at least typically 20 of the, even 21, 22 of the 24-hour cycle, that is not maximizing utilization. And one of the principles that we seem to be moving into, shifting into, I think we have to develop into, are these things around circular economics, which is mimicking nature, to put it very simply. And what does nature do? Doesn't waste anything, and and wasting things also includes utilization. So to maximize utilization, that's the key. And owning a car is not maximizing utilization. It's madness.
So, could we like what sort of a scenario could you imagine in the future as to like what would be a more harmonious ecosystem? So, like we could maybe talk about a range of different powertrains or systems, or just I mean, where we're getting our energy from. I have no idea. You know, there's for all the arguments for one thing, there are counter arguments for another.
Well, there are, and often those counter arguments are actually based on vested interest. They're not necessarily saying, let's have a clean sheet of paper. What would work best? You know, that's a mistake people make in where we are with electric vehicles. They think, well, look, electric vehicles are a better option because of the efficiency of the electric motor. But then, you know, the counter argument is, yes, but the energy density in a battery, you know, can't touch with a barge pole the energy density in a fossil fuel tank. You know, these are facts. This is what it is. So the problem in trying to ascertain what should we do next is it's not a simple binary, what's the best thing to do? It's how do we get there? You know, it's this thing of transition. It's this thing of managing the status quo or the vested interest. And equally, you know, the way humanity and business and commerce and investment and finance all work is they're typically not things that just operate in a 2 or 3 year cycle. You can't say, let's stop what we're doing now, do that new thing for 2 or 3 years. And then when another new thing comes along, stop what we were doing that and change all over again. Yeah, it's very difficult to do that. And this is the fundamental challenge for the existing auto industry right now, is how to manage the transition. They have, you know, assets and liabilities and all sorts of things in the internal combustion engine. And, you know, encouraging and getting people to sort of shift it all into this unknown territory, which might or might not last for whatever period of time, you know, take batteries. People say, you know, let's just have electrification, lithium-ion batteries, they're the future. It all works. Tesla have proven it works. So why can't everyone just copy them and do that? Well, if you then look at where we are, for example, with hydrogen, I said I wanted to mention that briefly. We have a ludicrous discussion around hydrogen at the moment with a lot of people who simply denigrate it totally, you know, and unequivocally without any kind of specific, but what about particular applications? What about where we might go with it? And I think the resilience that we need, that word again, has to incorporate a number of different capabilities in terms of energy management and mobility, and fundamentally energy storage, especially with renewables. You know, the obvious intermittency of solar and wind is such that we need ever greater and in fact enormous capacity in storing that energy that's captured. And hydrogen is absolutely one of the best ways in which we can capture, control, manage and distribute that energy, but probably not for cars. I definitely agree with that. But I think for aviation, I mentioned electric aircraft earlier on, by the way, if you recall, and also in marine shipping, and also heavy trucking. So the trouble is we go back to this being a tribal discussion all too often. People look for nice, single, simple solutions. They assume that because Tesla have an enormous, you know, share value, you know, market capitalization, that it must mean, therefore, that everything they're doing is right, and that is the future. I suppose there's some logic to that thought, but it's far too simplistic.
Roger, one of the things that was brought up with regard, we are aware of all the positive aspects of electric vehicles, for example. What are the negative aspects? I mean, the way this might be an oversimplification of it, but the way, let's imagine a perfect system for a moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got clean energy that could be wind or solar, for example, and then you've got an electric vehicle which doesn't let off any local emissions, so their environment around in which it operates is a lot cleaner, and then. And if the whole let's also throw in a hypothetical that the materials that it's made from is all are mostly sustainable, or a lot more sustainable than what we've got at the moment. What is the negative point in this picture? Is it the extraction of the raw materials for the batteries? Is that the biggest negative with electric vehicles?
To some extent, yes. But what's been happening in mining and mineral processing over the last number of years is they've been getting a lot better at that focus on the environmental impact. Why? Well, because they've had to, because of legislation and because of, the momentum that you're seeing around the world, triggered by things like, the Paris Agreement. So yes, I mean, anything where you extract something from the ground, and whether that's for batteries or whether that's for hydrogen fuel cells, platinum or etc. Anything where you are taking elements, resources, something out of the ground is by definition finite. Now, whether that finite measure is a year, 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years, at one point it runs out. So ironically, the journey to electrification and the use of batteries, where people say this is just so much better than the carcinogens and the whole issue with CO2 and oil extraction, there's a slight hypocrisy to that, because we've still got to go and scratch stuff off the surface of the earth and dig stuff up from under the ground. So if we can move away from that as best as possible, the better, which is where I come back again to this mass adoption of EV thing. A lot of these things aren't bad in of themselves. It's the scale that they've become because of the population on the planet. Someone of my age, or older, can sometimes get confused and think, oh, hang on, we've had these things for years. They've never been a problem. Owning cars or flying in an aeroplane or doing all the things now which contribute massively to CO2 increase. Was it 420 parts a million now? Maybe a bit more. It isn't that actually. It's scale. If only 1 billion people or 2 billion people have got access to cars or access to flight and going around the world, you could argue the world kind of copes with it. The way in which everything, conspires and sort of recycles and naturally sort of develops and diminishes, I guess. And this is where I'm not an expert, Sam. I'm just kind of outlining what I think would be the case. In the past, because of the low volumes of all those things, even so they were bad, but because there wasn't so much of it, we got away with it. What's different today is there are so many people using so many things, buying so much stuff, and anything where it's a big item, a big ticket item, and there's an alternative to it that technology can deliver, liberate, take, personal ownership of vehicles. If a credible alternative is more cost effective, more attractive, and works better, then you're going to do it, aren't you? Why wouldn't you? And that's the journey we're on. That's what we need to do. That's about efficiency and adopting these principles of circular economics.
Okay, then if we jump over to hydrogen now, Roger, again there seems to be a lot of the same pros that you have with electricity. I have also heard, again, I am a complete numbnuts when it comes to this, but that the actual production of hydrogen can be also catastrophic if it's not done in the correct way. What are the things that are limiting? What are the arguments against hydrogen at the moment, and why is that not a viable option for transport?
The arguments against hydrogen are really born out of a number of things. One, there are three types of hydrogen. There's green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and brown hydrogen. So the way in which hydrogen is made, the materials that you use to make it, and how the infrastructure works around distributing it are all subject to active discussion. The clear blue water that batteries have now in terms of their relative energy density and certainly speeding charge speed time and increasingly range have kind of pushed back the proposition of hydrogen fuel cell cars, in my view. However, the two or three big things I mentioned earlier are still unresolved in regard to what can the battery do. So they are marine, they are aviation, and they are heavy trucking and renewable energy storage. So the argument's been sort of popularized by comments like, and it was Elon Musk that said it to investors some years ago. He called them hydrogen fuel cells. And he said it was just illogical to use energy to make a storage device to store energy. And okay, if you say it like that, sounds quite logical. But if you look at the what's missing is infrastructure. What's missing is joined up thinking and investment. But if you look around the world, there are trillions of dollars just waiting to go into this for all the right reasons, from pension funds, from investors, from other people, not because they're stupid, not because they want to do something that, all kind of, I don't know, just sort of, yeah, it's become a very fractured and quite frankly, illogical discussion or debate. To see the evidence where a small startup called Zero Avia, I'm on the advisory board of that, so I declare vested interest, only the other day announced $37 million investment, Series A funding, including investment from people like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, means something. It tells you something. Now, just for a second, and I don't like going into these sort of parts of the discussion, but I'm going to. When you have people suggest that the investing into hydrogen, or government saying there's a hydrogen economy, or whatever else that phrase they want to use, this is all a sinister distraction away from investment into batteries and electric vehicles, and that it's some sort of global conspiracy that somehow, a letter was sent to all of these clever people all around the world, investors, scientists, and other super smart people saying, let's not let on that doesn't have a future. This is never going to happen. And let's just keep distracting people. Here's a check for 50 grand, please keep spinning this stupid story. Do you really think that's the case? I mean, I've spent enough time with enough clever people to know that, you should pay attention to people that understand what they're talking about. And yes, some of them probably are lobbyists. Some of them have been, funded by people to get them to say a certain thing. There's no doubt about that. But I have a pretty good bullshit radar, I think. Occasionally comes on for myself, actually, if I'm honest, Sam, when I'm talking. But on this particular subject, I think, if we just dismiss out of hand hydrogen, we will have made an enormous mistake. So I, for one, will not do that, which is why I'm happy to lend my name to Zero Avia, and where, I'm looking forward to talking to more people, and certainly during next year, focusing quite a lot on why I believe this is part of the story.
Wow. Well, that's super interesting, Roger. Yeah, it's enlightened me for sure, and hopefully a few others, because that was something that, again, I mean, when I finished university in 2009, and there was actually an internal project of one of the professors there, and he was working on a little hydrogen powered car, actually, and at that stage there was a big, like, I think this was really in the infancy of companies like Modec, but also Tesla as well. We knew about this company in California and this guy, but nobody was taking it seriously at that stage. And it was still, if you looked at the Motorshows at that time, there was kind of like there was a lot of enthusiasm around alternative powertrains, but there was an unclear orientation towards either electric or hydrogen. You know, they both seem to be very viable options at that stage. And as we've progressed, and I guess, as you said, like Tesla has a lot to answer for in terms of people referencing that as some sort of a successful business model and viable options. So it's interesting to hear what are the pros and cons of hydrogen, for example.
Just to add on to that, if there's one thing that you get to understand in regard to electric vehicles and batteries, is that China's stolen a march. Why? Because they adopted a very clear strategy. It was part of a bigger thing called Made in China 2025. One of the principal architects of that strategy in and around electric vehicles was a guy called Gang Wang. I love some of these Chinese names, Mr. Gang Wang. So it's I know a few people with similar names, so that's why I have to. But let me explain. So he is a super smart guy. He's a scientist, and he basically assigned a strategy to China around developing the supply chain for batteries. You can't make electric vehicles if you can't make batteries. You can't make batteries if you haven't got a supply chain. So around the world, the Chinese went about, not by stealth, everyone could see them doing it, buying mines, buying mineral supplies, buying into that supply chain of the fundamental minerals and mineral processing. They've done it for lithium, they've done it for cobalt, they've done it for manganese, they've done it for copper, they've done it for, all of the principal minerals within battery chemistries. And so they've had a strategy and they've got on with it. They've had a plan and they've been executing that plan. Now, the very same architect of that process over the last 10 years has, for the last 4 or 5 years, advocated a significant investment and focus on hydrogen. So we've got two choices. We can either say, oh, he must be part of the conspiracy as well, to deflect, resources and to slow down the other thing. Or we can say to ourselves, well, let's learn the lesson from the last time we missed a trick, and we now see China and Asia being dominant in where we are, and let's crack on with it. So where we are now is that China has a developing lead in hydrogen, in the march towards hydrogen economy. You can call it that, but actually, so does Europe. Europe is increasingly focused on this with real joined up thinking between member states in the EU, and hopefully even those people on the outskirts of it as well, including us, of course, in a few weeks' time. Let's not talk about that, please, Sam. But America and elsewhere isn't at the race with hydrogen, it seems to me. So it's going to be a very, very important and fascinating time. This is not fun. This is not a game. This is super important to geopolitics, to this, sustaining, the focus on climatic change, delivering the carbon economy, and all this other stuff. So this isn't something to just be flippant about. It's incredibly important.
Can I ask you a potentially dumb question? We've talked briefly about electric vehicles. We've talked briefly about hydrogen. What is happening with the solar car? Why can't we put a solar panel on a roof and let that power the car? Is the technology not?
Well, we can. I mean, that's already happened. I was in China about 3 years ago. Maybe 4 years ago. I went to a company called Hanergy, 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 big solar energy company in China. They showed us around an amazing sort of, won't call it museum, but a kind of demonstration facility. And they had a solar car there, a car that was entirely, the body was made up of photovoltaic cells. And okay, are Hanergy a solar electric car maker that everybody knows about now and we can all go and buy one? No, they're not. But what they were doing, it was evidence of where they were with R&D. And you have now companies around the world. There's a Dutch startup who developed a solar power car. And yes, it works. And as the efficiency, again, back to that key word, develops around the ability to capture and store energy at a certain level, and to keep that on board and use it as motive power, those things are important. And ironically, Sam, the sooner we get to shared mobility and autonomous cars and all the other things, and get away from this fixation of, oh yes, but it must do 300 or 400 or 500 miles, the better, because that's likely to liberate things like that. Because as you'll hear many times, the average journey XYZ by most people is blah blah blah. It's normally well under 100 miles a day. It's normally actually something like 30 or 40. And even if we go back to the way we were after this pandemic in terms of work pattern and travel times and all the rest of that, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But even if we did, the majority of journeys on the planet are not long ones. And if then you get a vehicle on demand that has within that vehicle the required capability to do whatever journey that you've just booked it for, called it up on your app for, then we're not trapped in this, oh yes, but it's got to do 400, 500, 600 miles, otherwise it's rubbish. So the dynamic to a lot of things that are coming, including solar powered cars, fits into this shift of the usage pattern.
Right. So and okay, one of the last like potentially complex questions that I'll ask you with regards to another form of I don't know, powertrain is cleaner fuels. So if we take the existing makeup of an internal combustion engine, there was a lot of, again, around the time that I was at university, we were asking a lot of questions about biodiesels and biofuels and that sort of thing. Have we got anything that is that is more sustainable than what we're currently using that you know of?
It's a good question. I know a bit about biofuels, but not a lot. I'm not going to pretend to sort of start talking too much. The overriding thing that's always stuck in my mind when I've heard people talking about it is the potential that it takes away from growing foodstuffs for people, the issue that it has on land and the use of water. That those things don't seem to sit well with it being something that you'd scale up. Again, I wouldn't dismiss anything. A targeted solution, smaller scale solution, localized thing where it works within within a local circular economic proposition. Because again, this is the thing about where are we going? What sort of world do we want? We don't have to have a globalized, super connected, everything has to be mass scale world for it to work. A lot of what does work well and always did for hundreds of years for humanity was the kind of principle of, small is beautiful. The thing about localizing all the things that you need. We've become a mass industrialized society and become a global society for lots of the right reasons, but a few of the very wrong ones. One of those being the reason why we've done that is to make a lot of money for a very small number of people, but with a giant consequence for the planet and humanity. Well, that's just wrong, isn't it? So if you look around the world, in countries like Africa and India, South America, few other places, there are societies and people who work perfectly well within their own ecosystem. It's benign, it works, it's sustainable. So that's where, biofuels, I don't dismiss them out of hand, but scaling them up and using them in a way in which we're reliant on them, I don't know enough about it, but I feel a bit uncomfortable about it. That's my intuition.
Okay. This is potentially a bit of a redundant question, but again, to come back to a discussion we were having a couple of episodes back with a good friend of mine. He, the same person that was saying about, a mass adoption of EVs again would, potentially be shifting the problem down the road. One of the things that came up out of that discussion was that actually, like, companies that are doing Resto Mods, for example, a company like Singer, where are taking old products and breathing a new life into them. Yes, they are still using a big, dirty 4-liter straight six engine, but the argument for a product like that could be that you're not producing a new one, and of course that you're buying something that you're not going to throw away next week, and you've got something that you're also probably not going to drive every single day. Where do you stand on those sort of products?
There's a general answer to that, Sam. It's about
Yes.
use, reuse, and recycle. Whatever is most benign to the environment that works within also works within an economic proposition is fine by me. Personally, I think we've become almost visceral in our sense of the internal combustion engine, and I just think that's wrong, because it's about scale. We've never had 1 point something billion vehicles on the planet, and they're all internal combustion engine, bar a couple of million EVs. And yes, of course, that's going to change and shift. But take motorsport, for example. Maybe it's my age. Maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy. I know Marty Rimac thinks that a lot of motorsport is for a certain generation. Maybe he's right. But I like motorsport, and I have no qualm in going along and watching classic car racing, for example, or Formula One. I don't think we should just wipe out, the internal combustion engine completely, as though it's some kind of, completely evil monster. It's about scale. It's about context. It's about proximity. The biggest issue we've got in towns and cities around the world is the proximity of diesel, buses, taxis, and vans to human beings. And the only country, to the best of my knowledge, in the world that's kind of properly recognized that and done something about it is China, because they have adopted and pushed far quicker with electric buses, taxis, and vans than anywhere else. And this isn't a criticism of Tesla, because Tesla are a game changer. They are so significant in so many ways. But the focus on cars, especially expensive cars, has been a distraction to a certain extent, in my opinion.
That's a really great answer, Roger. I think what's also important to understand, which sounds totally obvious when you say it, but what you're talking about now with regards to local environments in cities is that's essentially a different problem to global warming. This is talking about local clean air for human beings, right? And versus the bigger picture with regards to creating more greenhouse gases
Yeah, but Sam, you were at Coventry University, weren't
yes.
you, back in the late 2000s?
Yeah.
Did you come to Modec?
I did, yes. I did.
You did?
Yes.
You did?
Yes,
oh,
did.
wow.
I did.
Wow. Well, you see, here's the thing. The guy that set up Modec, the man who funded it, for all the people that work there doing amazing things, the guy that we should tip our hat to more than anyone is Jamie Borick, because it was Jamie's money that set the company up and run it. I guess Jamie's family money, actually. He spent, I don't know, 30, 40 million on it and ended up with nothing.
Oh my God.
Exactly. And that's an individual. It's not like a pension fund or a big organization. The guy was principled and believed in it and went for it. And he will always have my admiration for that. But one of the reasons he did this was because he was chairman of the British Lung Foundation. And so the imperative for Jamie, to a great extent, in building out either electric taxis, as it was going to be originally, but then electric trucks, was working on a twin imperative, that twin imperative being clean air for cities and a reduction of CO2. Jamie's vision was always about those two things. And at the time, and this is why we skewed much of the taxation system and other things into diesel, there was too much singular focus on CO2 reduction. And therefore, because diesel is more efficient, I suppose, not entirely inappropriate thought was, well, okay, let's get more of those. But the problem there was then in proximity to people in towns and cities, that was the last thing to do because of PM 2.5 and other carcinogens from the pollutants from a diesel vehicle, the particulates. So people like Jamie Borrick and others, and that's why myself and others went to work for him and with him, were way ahead of all this. And it should always have been a twin imperative: clean air in cities, which is where increasingly most people live, and a CO2 reduction, because without that, we are all screwed. Yeah, so you went to Modec, you had a look around. I don't know if you heard people talking like that then, or you just went to look at the design, the kind of setup of the factory, the kind of way it worked.
I think we were pretty again completely in the dark and just all a bit bright-eyed and just intrigued to see what was going on behind these doors, you know. And there was a potential joint project between the design department in the university and Modec as well, which I think some students got involved with. We didn't in the end, but it was more just looking at the whole process, because they showed us around. There was like a little track within the yes, like basically just a very clean floor with like markings to show like this is the way that the vans will be assembled, and it was more of an overview, you know. And
well, what none of us realized was how ahead of the game it was. You know, we were, especially the guys who were the technical guys, the designers in and around software, the management of the battery, the motor inverter, the design of the cab, and even, as you just described, the setup of the factory. It was, in effect, a micro factory. And we now see people like Arrival doing exactly that. But we didn't realize what we had. We were at a different time, very different economic perspective of things. But just a quick one on the design, Sam, because I know that's your bag, that's your thing.
Yeah.
The guy that designed the cab of the Modec, I'm sure you can remember what it looks like at the front, big wraparound glass, you know, all the rest of it. His name is James Dex. And James told me what... Do you know James?
We've got mutual friends, but I know of him. I don't know him personally.
Okay. Well, I was out with James once because I used to do a lot more of this than I do now. Spend too much time on the computer on bloody LinkedIn. That's the trouble, Sam. But I used to go out drinking and things like that. You know, I used to have a life. And I can remember being out drinking with James one time, and I think we both had a few. I said, James, tell me, how did you design the Modec cab? And he just started laughing. He said, Roger, he said, I'm a big Star Wars fan. All I did was essentially copy a stormtrooper's helmet. If you look at the cab, it looks like a stormtrooper. Right, seriously, it truly does. You know, flash a picture up here when you're you know, when you get time somehow. That's what it was. That's what it was.
Have a look. I think I think like that was the question that I was having with regards to like local environments versus the bigger picture was not it was more to kind of make, I don't know, provide some more clarity on the fact that these are they are connected, but they all are also separate issues. So you answered that brilliantly, and that's awesome, Roger. Thank you. Two things. The first question that as we kind of start bringing things to a close, I wanted to ask what your opinion is on what large OEMs can do, rather than just going, okay, we need to just now, what we've been doing with the internal combustion engine, we need to do the same thing with EV engines as well. What sort of things can they do to truly make a difference so that we don't end up in this situation in another 50 years' time?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good and a very key question. Let's just define what we mean by OEMs. We mean big car companies, big original equipment manufacturers, which means people, which means girls and boys, men and women who work in engine plants, who work in gearbox plants, who work in the pressing, press shop, paint shop, all of that. People who work in sales and marketing, dealerships, etc. People who work hard, are trained to do what they do, get paid for it, come home, pay the bills, pay the mortgage, help the kids go to school, all those things. So when we're talking about OEMs and that change, let's remember that's what we're actually talking about, all of those things. So my belief is, and having come from that arena, having always been in automotive, that we have to help the industry have a managed transition. We have to have a calm, rational plan, discussion plan, and action to go about that. And we have to support people where we can, and not just default to thinking they're dragging their heels. There's a conspiracy, they don't really want to do it. For sure, there are people within those organisations with that view. A lot of them are the middle management, and I think some of them, quite frankly, are the unions. And I think we saw a hint of that recently with the sense of IG Metall wanting to slow down Volkswagen's progress and perhaps elbow Herbert Diess out of the equation. So it's complex. The one thing I saw recently that kind of I thought was good. I said, maybe not the right turn of phrase, but I'm struggling to think of the word, but it was when Ola Källenius was asked by, I think it was Reuters, with all these changes to autonomy, electrification, etc. coming, Mr. Källenius, is your company going to be a smaller company in the future? In other words, fewer people. And he said, yes, it is. And I thought, I haven't heard enough of that from leaders of car companies, because that's the truth. And I can only imagine he was in a position to say that because they'd had discussions with the unions. You know, the very thing that's created Germany being so dominant and successful in car making since really 1947, you could argue, was the fact that they put board members, union representatives on the management board. It's triggered a lot of, the right dynamic and relationship between workers and management over time, better than many other places in the world, certainly better than the UK, quite frankly, because that schism that we had with the workers and the management has been, the downfall of much of what was great about our auto industry. But that very thing now potentially is the thing that gets in the way in Germany of transition. So it was good to hear Herr Källenius talk about that, clearly having talked with the unions about it, which is why they announced their 2039 deadline of no more internal combustion engines, which means for a lot of people whose their mother or their grandmother, their father or their grandfather, their son or their daughter, in the future is not going to do the same job, needs to reskill. You won't be working in an engine plant in 2039, 38, 37, 36, 35, because we won't be making those engines. There won't be the demand for them. So this is a long-winded answer to your question, but to put simply, I think some of them won't be able to do this. Some of them will. I don't want to say who I believe, who I put my money on surviving and who not, because like I said, this is about individuals and people's jobs and livelihoods. So it's serious stuff. But are they playing catch up? Do they have some challenges? Is there a problem, looming towards them all? Yes. But I see my sort of job as a commentator is to have a calm, rational debate about that, not to poke anyone in the eye with a sharp stick. And given the fundamental importance of those industries to our economy here in Europe in particular, I believe I have a responsibility to help, just draw together the things I hear from other people. I'm not a designer of the how it's all going to work. I'm not clever enough, and I don't have enough knowledge to do that. But all I can do is, tell the story from the things that I hear people describing. People like, for example, Mate Rimac, who I have a lot of time and respect for. And I think Herbert Diess is bold and brave as well. So there are people both as incumbents and disruptors who I've got a lot of time for. William Lee, I like at NIO. I think he's a super smart guy as well. There's plenty of them around, both inside and outside traditional automotive.
With regards to efficiency that you've talked about, which is so key in this whole thing, and to de-abstract that term, there's a couple of things that need to happen. The first thing is autonomy is absolutely key in order to keep these vehicles in circulation all the time. The subscription model is becoming more and more prominent. there is a different set of values with the younger generation now, and it's something that we spoke briefly about before, where they're not so obsessed with car ownership specifically. There is going to be a kind of a convergence, isn't there, where we go from the demand will just decrease for personal car ownership. How what how what needs to happen for that to 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 truly make a large paradigm shift towards efficiency?
I think you hit the nail on the head there about generation. This is much a cultural shift, a behavioral shift, psychological shift, as it is a technical shift or engineering sort of shift. Um, and in terms of business, if you look at a given vehicle that a manufacturer makes, they can appropriate a value to each of those vehicles, profit per unit derived from friction parts, in the after sales market, from finance, income, etc., a number of things. And that's anchored in the model of someone buying and owning and using a car. And when you buy a car, what do you get? Well, you get a mobility solution. You can go from A to B when you like, how you like. That's all very nice, but at a price. But you also buy an identity. Why doesn't everyone buy a Kia Picanto? Because a Kia Picanto's a fine car. It's got wheels and an engine and stuff and can go from A to B. But why doesn't everybody buy that then? Because it's really cheap. It's because when you buy a car, you don't just want a mobility solution. You want a brand identity. That's why you choose Audi over, Vauxhall, or Vauxhall over Ford, or Ford over, anything else. These brands over time have been embedded in our culture as parts of who we are. But that's changing, as you say. It's a generational sort of shift. But coming back to the business model thing, if manufacturers can find a way to derive their recurring revenue income out of high utilization of the vehicles, and earn recurring revenue from either data or from energy or from other things, who knows? Maybe they could make more money selling far less cars, because the cars they do sell earn more revenue per unit. I'm not clever enough I'm not an actuary. I can't kind of say, oh, yes, that means they'll do this and get that, and that's how it'll work. But I suppose theoretically you could kind of see that happening. I genuinely and honestly cannot see us making 100 million vehicles every year like we kind of are at the moment. I think as we go forward, I would suggest that by 2030, the number of cars we'll be making on the planet will probably be 2/3 of that, maybe even half that number. There you go. I'm that's a stake in the ground. I'm not going to sit on the fence. That's what I think. Within a decade, massive reduction in volume.
So you think that in a very simplification of that basically the market will just be buying less, and therefore the companies hopefully will start producing less.
It's about quality, not quantity. It's about utilization, not ownership.
Okay, Roger, my last question, and then I'll let you go. Can humanity save itself?
Yes.
And what can we do?
Yes, we can. Because in human history, when we've been up against the wall, we surprise ourselves. We are resilient. This year, we've had an event which no human being living on the planet has ever seen before. We read about it, we can see films and documentaries about it, but no one's lived through it. And despite the monumental impact it's had on the world's activities, on people's lives, we have been resilient through it, and we will come through it. Probably compared to the impact of climate change, it's been kind of nothing, a sort of momentary sideswipe from nature. Nonetheless, I think we come out of it having learned incredibly valuable lessons about resilience, about logistics, about how to move things and people around the world, or how not to do that. So to answer your question, yes, we can. Will we do that? I hope so. I'm 61. I've probably got, I don't know, if I'm lucky, a couple of decades left before I'm not here. But, I'm lucky enough to have had children. My children are here. So, I'm kind of here vicariously through them into whatever the future is. So I've got vested interest in it, either in being alive or my offspring. And I know you've got young children too. So we should be optimistic. It's our job then to turn that optimism into action and to help collectively make the right things happen. So the answer to the question is yes.
Great. Roger, thank you very much. That was amazing. It was been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm glad we managed to do this. And yeah, thank you very much. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Well, thank you, Sam. Very, very kind of you. I really appreciate your interest and your time. Thank you.
Great. Awesome.